So, what really goes on behind the scenes for in house service design professionals? Are they the unsung everyday heroes shaping our experiences? Or are they constantly navigating complex internal mazes? Or perhaps a bit of both? Welcome to our special series where we try to lift the curtains and explore the true realities of in house service design. The goal of this series is to step away from polished case studies and into the actual lived experiences of professionals who are making services better from within the very organizations that deliver them. We want to learn from their on ground insights and the lessons they often had to learn the hard way. Hi, and welcome back to the Service Design Show. If you are a regular listener, you know we love to bring you wisdom from leading voices and pioneers in service design. And that's definitely not going to change anytime soon. But alongside that, I'm also passionate about shining a spotlight on the practitioners who are hands-on, doing the important day-to-day work of improving the services we are all interacting with. These are the professionals with a goldmine of practical wisdom who truly understand the sometimes vast gap between theory and what it actually takes to make things happen in the real world. Because, let's be honest, while books and courses offer a great foundation, the deepest, most impactful learning often happens from being right there in the thick of the action. So this conversation is the next in our monthly deep dive into the world of in-house service design. And today I'm excited to have two guests who are living this reality every single day. Irina Damascan and Gina Mendolia. Both are experienced professionals and valued members of my circle community, where they recently hosted some thought-provoking sessions. If you are not yet familiar with the circle, it's our dedicated community for in-house service design leaders and those who aspire to be. I started it a few years back, recognizing that working in-house can sometimes feel like you're on a solo mission. It can be incredibly tough to find peers who are genuinely interested and understand the unique challenges and can offer that vital support and diverse perspectives. Our goal with the circle is to be that supportive team, a collective of service design allies. If the circle sparks your interest and you would like to learn more, just head over to servicedesignshow.com/circle and you'll also find the link in the show notes. Now, as mentioned, in this episode, we'll be hearing from Irina and Gina. We'll dive into their unconventional paths into service design, from backgrounds like architecture and biotech. We'll also unpack some of the key takeaways from the community sessions they led, exploring intriguing ideas like setting traps for engagement and building organ donor chains for influence. And of course, we'll bust a few myths about what it truly means to be an in-house service design professional. So if you are ready for some behind-the-scenes stories and the nitty-gritty details you rarely hear, then you are definitely in the right place. My name is Mark Fontein, and you are listening to the Service Design Show. Welcome to the show, Gina and Irina.
So, hi.
It's always funny with those internet delays to doing a synchronous thing. We have a countdown on Zoom as well in our circle sessions, which is always chaos. And saying welcome and hello is also a chaos. Anywho, excited to have you on. We are going to dive deep into the mystiques of doing service design in-house. We'll chat a little bit about your recent circle community sessions and just dig into your stories. And I'm sure you have a lot of them. As always, just like in the previous two episodes that we did, I will try to pass on the microphone between you two and make sure that we get enough content there. The first question that we like to start this series with is to get a better understanding of how you ended up in a place like where you are today. So maybe Irina, could you give us a little bit of insight into your journey into service design?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So it's not my first time in on the podcast. So some of the listeners might have seen me in a previous one. I'm gonna start from scratch this time. So I've been in service design around 12 years now. Before we even called it service design, I think I've started with a design education background in architecture, and that kind of evolved into me trying to understand better the systems that created the premises of what we were designing at that point, as in actual physical buildings. And I moved into digital because there was a lot of interest, both for myself, but also for the context that I was in. I left Romania when I was 24, where I was born, and I'm in the Netherlands since then. And it's been about 11 years now. So in that time of transitioning from one country to another, I kind of had to navigate the language differences, the fact that the workplace needed to be adapted to what I was really passionate about, but also to what was valid in the market at that time. So architecture per se was not necessarily giving me the full experience that I was looking to have in the workplace, and transitioning into digital seemed like a natural way to adapt with the times and what was in the market at that time. It was really popular to look into UX. We called it UX even back then. So but I was a little bit higher level. I was not necessarily trained into the arts of creating the UI. I was more into the UX as we see it in a strategic way. But going beyond that, I was really seeing the connections to how is the triple bottom line of the company influenced and impacted. So I did a lot of consulting in my background, and I ended up in house because I really wanted to learn more from a community and be together with other designers on a more regular basis.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. So many different backgrounds when I speak to service design professionals. Nobody went to service design school. Everybody has a different path. Gina, did you also have a connection with architecture, or what was your journey into service design?
No architecture for me. I have one of those non-traditional backgrounds and paths into service design. I actually started out mostly in biotech and operations, and through doing human-centered biotech operations development, I was in a tiny, tiny startup. I realized that this was a hard job, and making it better for those technicians who had to do some really technical work. That was human centered design, and blending ops with that human centered design turned into service design. And
Wow,
now I do it at a big organization.
that's crazy. Biotech. Are you still involved in some way in biotech?
I do some charity work and
You have a
on the
garden.
side.
you grow
It's
you grow your own tomatoes.
not in biotech, but I do stay involved in public health. Yeah.
Interesting. So the other question that is also always interesting is looking at how you define success. Now, this could be success on a personal level. When do you feel that you've accomplished something meaningful as a professional? Can also be within your professional context. So the general question: how do you define success? What does success mean for you?
I think on a project, we'll start there. It's about changing some of the pace of the momentum. So if a team is going too fast, my job is, and I am successful when I'm able to add some really important moments of friction for them. So it's a moment to think a little deeper or to think a little broader or just change how their perspective on it. And if the team is really stuck, then my job is to create an infusion of energy, some kind of movement to get the project out of its little hole and into a new place so that they can problem solve better.
And you wanted to add, because this was on a project level?
Oh, that's on a project level. I guess generally, I really am trying to get people to spend just a single extra second thinking. We're bombarded with AI now and so much dopamine hits from like all of our technology, and it's easy to not think. And we're in the moment of inconvenience never happens. We're all about convenience. And so adding little moments of friction and having that moment where you actually think is really important. And so that's personally where I see success.
Interesting. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're either slowing things down or you're speeding things up.
Mm-hmm.
What's the ideal pace?
I don't think there is one. And we all get stuck in that trap, especially now, like design, we have all these frameworks and everything is supposed to be this structured thing that we can democratize and share with everybody. Part of the special sauce of design overall is the ability to spend some time in that ambiguity. And sometimes it's fast and sometimes it's slow. And sometimes we don't know where the heck we're going. And being okay with it is the most important.
Interesting. I we'll get back to that, hopefully, to see how you know whether or not you're actually accomplishing that. But let's pause that for a moment. So, Irina, are you also slowing things down and creating friction? And do you count that as success?
If you ask my manager, you would definitely get a yes answer.
Most designers will probably, yeah.
Yeah, but what I love about this, and what Gina said that was super relevant for my case as well, is that I really love it when people start asking themselves questions of why are they doing what they're doing. So for me, my recipe for success is when people are thinking at a deeper level about why they're doing what they're doing. And then being able to contextualize to adapt to either increase the pace or decrease the pace, because I'm kind of influenced by the vocabulary you just used. In my own words, what I saw as being success for the projects that I was involved in was how people got into the stage of processing what they were doing, and then creating a map of the elements that were getting them stuck, and then enabling a different way of functioning by removing the boundaries of what was blocking them, or stopping them from making it work better. I've seen teams that have been in situations where, you're for years trying to improve something and it doesn't work. You're just banging your head on the same answer, that either management doesn't have resources or whatever. And the one moment of truth that they had was when I asked them, like, if there was something that you would be able to map, would you be able to map your workarounds? And that word, the workarounds, really elevated the discussions, because they realized I'm not stuck for 3 years. I'm still working, but I'm working through the workarounds, which takes me a lot longer. So now that I have the vocabulary, I'm going to map those workarounds, and I'm going to tell my boss that this is what's stopping me. This is why it's going so slow, or I'm still in this phase. And yeah, putting language like that in their vocabulary really helped.
So it's about that sense making and those aha moments and creating clarity. Is that right?
And doing that together, because nobody has the vocabulary from the beginning. And a lot of them are already doing things to improve, and you're never the expert. As a service designer, you're always coming in and you're replicating things that they do so that you can also acquire the embodied knowledge together with them. But you can only join for a part of the ride, and then you have to let go. So they need to acquire the words and the vocabulary that you are using as well to be able to navigate better once you are not guiding them anymore.
I'm curious, Irina. Often when we get involved in these kinds of processes and we start helping people to see more clearly and gain better understanding, the result is often that whatever the outcome is, it becomes so obvious. Like I could have, like, this is something I could have come up with, but they didn't. And then so therefore, like, I don't know, how do you see that in your role? Like, do people
I mean,
respond like, yeah,
I don't take credit for any of the things that they discover that they could have done. And what I really love about it is that you are coming there with zero knowledge or particularly little knowledge on the domain that you are consulting on, because you're mostly coming as an external facilitator, and you're enabling them to acquire vocabulary around the work that they already do. And then you help them make the decisions that they were not thinking of taking before. And you're not taking the glory of the discovery. You're rather facilitating them to take ownership of it, because they would need to take that further to leadership in other places to get more funding for it, to change things around. You are just there to celebrate with them the success and the knowledge that you acquire together. And in that context, um, you are really the one that is putting everything together in a common view that everyone can understand at any level. And that's the part that you need to own, because the success is of the team that you have guided.
you take a very serving role, which is great, and I think most of us listening do. And then it becomes really hard to pick out what is it that you can own. Like, how can you see your own contributions? How can you clarify that? How can you help others see that? Anywho, I don't want to get into that right now, because we have more things to explore. Um, so you both work at, let's call it, pretty well-known organizations. For people who are interested, have a look at LinkedIn. The links will be in the show notes. But Gina, without breaking any NDAs or getting fired, could you sort of help us understand, like, what are some of the challenges that you work on? Because from my experience, nobody gets assigned on a project to design a service, even though they are a service design professional. So what is it that you're working on?
So right now I am working with an internal innovation lab, where we're actually using the design thinking methods and specifically an experimental approach to learning and testing new ways the employees can exist in our workplace. And so that can be new pieces of technology, or that can also be new community events or different ways to engage with physical office space or the people inside of the office space. So I'm working behind the scenes to improve that process, to make how we actually serve the people who are experimenting be even more effective. So, what's the best framework for uh, the team to engage with to move their projects along? How do they make a good decision on something to test? How do they actually collect data around that? And then how do they present that and tell the story around it? And so that's one of the big projects. A few others are working with the culinary team or working with support centers to improve the employee experience
How do people
globally.
refer to your role? Do you have the title of service designer, or like, how do you go about these days?
I do have a service designer title.
Nice.
And it's official, which is really cool in some ways. But I'd say I almost never actively try and lead with that. And I'm not the only service designer that does that. I think that's almost universal at this point. Most of the time, I'm seen as a facilitator, a really wonderful thought partner, somebody that helps move the project along. So somebody who wants to help build the experience or think deeply about what needs to happen.
Hmm. That's a good quality to be known for. Yeah, we need this project to move forward. Like, who should we bring along? Yeah, Gina, she gets things on. Nice. Irina, do you have a service design title, or did they give you a
Um,
different label?
I actually changed titles recently, and the reason for that is because I've been a service designer in the innovation department of digital of my organization for a while, and we were doing all sorts of internal projects. where the ownership of the knowledge was pretty much on the product team level. And there's a very interesting kind of division of knowledge carrying here, that my organization, and I guess a lot of other organizations have, which is that the product team is usually owning the knowledge of the experience in that product, and you as a designer, if you're not allocated to that product team to work in particular, then you are kind of like floating. And after some years of floating and not owning that knowledge, I switched to a more knowledge owned domain. So I'm now in the accessibility area, and I talk about inclusive design. And a lot of my roles now is to kind of like bring the accessibility knowledge to the organization. So working with these product teams, as well as understanding how do these product teams refer to their own knowledge in accessibility, how do they report accessibility, and how do we also comply with the law, because there are laws around it and they're coming to motion in less than a month. So it's becoming increasingly important for organizations to have inclusive design in the bottom line of their profit, people, and planet, right? So I guess my title now is a little bit different, but I kind of do the same work, but now with more knowledge ownership. So in other cases, I was the one kind of bringing the awareness over the customer experience, because I owned the experience in specific touch points, and then I elevated that across different product teams to make them aware that this is a service that has multiple points and your products are contributing and enabling this. Whereas now I'm more owner of the expertise of accessibility, and I'm checking in with the product teams where are they at in the funnel of benefiting from the service of the knowledge of accessibility. So accessibility knowledge as a service could be the way to interpret this.
Interesting.
And I guess organizations that do well accessibility end up in the phase where it's more and more embedded in product discovery in the earlier stages of product development, rather than as compliance and afterthoughts in terms of assessments.
Yeah.
So my work is really revolving now around enabling the service of accessing this knowledge earlier on in your discovery.
Makes me, the way you describe this makes me think of the conversations I've had around research ops and how do you make research available throughout the organization, and that there are actually people thinking about offering that as a service. And I don't know, accessibility research ops might also be a domain.
Research of accessibility is a very niche thing on its own, right? And organizations that are mature enough and have enough people will hire a researcher that has experience in accessibility as well to do that. We have a dedicated principal that does research for accessibility, and that sits with other product teams and helps them to understand how to do research with people with disabilities, because that's a very different type of experience.
All right. So you're working on accessibility as a service design or with a service design mindset. Gina, you're working with an innovation lab, different context, same approach, same attitude, same mindset, same tools, most likely. And the other thing that connects us all is that we cannot deliver outcomes or results or impact on our own. We're always collaborating. We're always, quote unquote, influencing. And well, let it be that was the theme of our season inside the Circle community. It actually still is for another month. We're diving into collaboration and influence because that's one of the things that connects us all. You both hosted a session at our dinner table with other service design professionals, in-house service design professionals from across the globe who all share similar challenges. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into what you put on the table, the food for thought that you brought, and what's stood out for you. So maybe we can start with you, Gina. You had a very interesting and a little bit provoking title of your session. Could you give us a brief summary of what did you discuss?
My dinner table test session was called Setting the Trap, getting teams to engage or creating the conditions for engagement. This was based off of a talk that I did on the end of the last year, and it's all born out of me reflecting on what is the next level of service design when we can't just focus on making maps. I think frequently what we describe service design as a blueprint, as a journey map, as these like big flows, and we're always creating an artifact, and that's how we're measured. Not everything I do needs a map, and not everything I do for sure needs a pretty map. And actually, a lot of the work that I found myself doing was this glue type work, which lots of service designers talk about. But it's really hard to write down glue type work at the end of your weekly review or at a quarterly review, or like, what did I have an impact on? And so I sat down and I really started to think about what type of work I was doing. And I presented that thought to our dinner table. And what I had come up with were ways that we engage that is more about not connecting the dots across a map themselves, but creating the opportunities and the space for our teams to do the dot connecting on their own. And so we bring the dots closer, but we're not actually going to make them connect. The teams will do that themselves. We talked about a couple of different techniques inspired by different types of roles that can get that job done.
So, not connecting the dots per se, but helping people to connect the dots themselves or facilitate them, create a space. And you mentioned that you had looked at different roles. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, service design is that role that's on the edge of design. And I think we have lots of inspiration for making design principles from our traditional design houses of architecture or Bauhaus, etc. Because service design is not that true fully pixel-based design. There's a little bit more of back-end connecting. I looked at external roles that did similar things. And so I was trying to take inspiration from therapists, coaches, and grandmas or family members. And I was using those kind of provocative or just outside of the box in design inspiration to think about how they approach their role in their job or their role in the world and how they're doing facilitation. And when you think about it, a therapist is all about creating and holding space. They're there creating the opportunity for you to talk about your problems, but they're not going to be out there in the real world when they're like you have to deal with whatever is there. But they're going to help build tools to help you make better choices. Coaches are not on the court or on the field with you, but they are making sure you work on the things that you need to improve, encouraging you to try different drills. Maybe you're righty, but they're going to make you play left-handed to understand a different perspective. And grandmas, at least in my respect, or elder members of the community, just members in your community, often are creating space for you to engage in a familial sense, in a multi-generational sense, ways that are they're not the same as yours, and they're not the same as your peers. And I think that is something really important to think about when you're a service designer entering as a non-expert, but folks are. And so that's a similar dynamic that I was looking to understand how we can also define our roles when we're working as designers, service designers in these orgs.
How did the other circle members respond to your proposition of using these as quote unquote role models compared to maybe what we traditionally look for as role models, as you mentioned, architecture, but industrial design? Like that is the classic direction to look for of what a quote unquote good designer looks like, or the qualities. And now you're proposing therapists, coaches, and grandmas. Like, what was their response in the community?
Surprisingly, great. There was a lot of folks resonating with this concept. to think about how we approach, because I think a lot of people are doing that glue work and it's really, really hard to articulate it. Also, not to say our design work is very important. We're very impactful by doing visual work. And so we should keep our architectural inspiration. But I think adding in other places of inspiration was a good source of conversation and discussion for our group.
And you put out the challenge on LinkedIn to come up with, or one of the other members, I don't recall, but I think it was you, to come up with other archetypes and role models that we can look up to or learn from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of all looking to John Ivy. Okay, let's take a break here, Gina, and look at the maybe parallels that emerged in Irina's session. You sort of also tapped into collaboration, but you approached it from a slightly different angle, right?
My approach was more like, where do you start collaboration? And I love that Gina says, like, you're gonna help them connect the dots by themselves. You're gonna give them enough tools for them to connect the dots by themselves. I was more of the approach of like, let me see how I am equipped to create a relationship with my peers, to understand where they're at in that journey of, like I said in the beginning, of the vocabulary that they have around the workarounds that they already do. How much do they acknowledge that this is an issue? Are they able to confide in me? And how can I, if I'm trying to do a bigger impact type of project, how can I create what I called as, and hear me out, maybe it's not the most orthodox way of saying it, but like an organ donor chain, kind of. I called it like that because when you are trying to figure out what does it take for me to get what I need to do, the outcome of my work, you will often find that there are not just blockers in your project, but there are other parts of the organization that have priorities that you will be able to enable by creating an organ donor chain and make your need also happen. So what I challenged people to do in the circle was to kind of like reflect on whether you have a warm or cold relationship, and kind of go through different items of what does that kind of relationship mean now at this level. Like, in time, the relationship will become warmer, but what are the kind of like parameters or elements that would help you get a warmer relationship in time? And going very explicit about that was very helpful for a lot of people, because like I said about my own experience, I sometimes struggle to understand where people want to do small talk, or where do people want to connect with me on a personal level. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to not have a map of that, but to be able to understand if you are working with the right people, and these people might have similar knowledge to you, or you might complete each other's gaps, or maybe they have a secret agenda that you can find out, and then you are able to figure out how warm is going to be your relationship based on how you're proposing different things to them. That enables to create that organ donor chain, because you're going to find out more things about the person that will allow to align these favor circles. And you're paying a favor to someone who really appreciates your work in a specific way, and your knowledge helps them elevate their work. And then with that knowledge being shared and that favor being played out, you are creating a necessity of the other person to also do something, maybe not for you directly, but for someone that will end up doing something for you back. So depending on how big you want to create the circle, you can involve multiple people and make sure that they share with one another those favors. And yeah, that creates change. That creates collaboration long term.
Doing favors was a key element in the conversations that we eventually had, and sort of It's
I
not the
even
right
left them
word.
with a challenge, right?
Yeah, to do a favor. And like
Yeah.
it's sometimes in an organizational setting, it's hard to step away from the tit for tat or the transactional value exchange. Like, I do this for you and I expect this in return. And I think what you sort of challenge people on is like, just do something because you can help someone in the organization. Don't expect anything in return now, but like give it time and have patience and have trust that it eventually will make your life and work easier.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a boomerang. It's gonna come back one way or another.
Yeah, and you don't like, and but that is the tricky part. You don't know how or when, and you just have to
And
trust.
probably not from the same person, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But that requires trust and patience and taking a gamble and not being transactional. And that can be hard in an environment where everybody's focused on maybe what's in it for me, right?
And that's actually the challenge that I had with the organ donor change. I had the challenge of getting beyond the bottlenecks of your particular project and looking at the larger picture of the organization, because it can be that the flavors that that you're paying to someone are favors that enable in a completely different part of the organization, but that somehow creates room for your project, even though it's not connected, to also get budget, traction, new ideas, new people, resources, and so on and so forth.
So, Irina, how do you do this in practice? Because your time is limited, your attention is limited. You cannot go sprinkling favors around to anybody and everybody in the
No,
organization. So, are you strategic? Do you like draw a number from a hat? Like, how do you approach this?
I mean, I have two things that I use. The knowledge that I acquire actively in a project that I'm part of is knowledge that I can use as insights and or share as insights with people that may benefit from that knowledge, even though they're not connected to my project. So I have the active engagement of being in a project, and I find out insights that may help another team somewhere else in another place. And I actively pursue sharing that insight with whoever is receiving
Hmm.
that knowledge, and that creates either the awareness that I am actively looking out for them, so I'm helping them somehow through my insight, but it also creates the awareness that Irina is getting those insights on a consistent basis, and she might be an invaluable resource for other insights that she might have acquired that will be distilled and explained in a way that I can benefit from them long term. So, what Gina said, like, they're going to look for my name because they know I'm usually the one holding that knowledge or knowing about it. So, I I created the reputation that I can untie a very messy um, uh, situation, and that's the way. And the other one is reactively. So if someone is coming to ask me something in particular, and I don't have that knowledge yet, I will definitely know at least someone that might have that knowledge, and I will be able to connect those people to talk.
You're, yeah, you're instead of 6 degrees of connection, it becomes one.
Exactly. Exactly. So I've always been the connector outside of work as well, for my private community. Like, as a Romanian expat in Amsterdam for many years, I've connected a lot of people, and that's something that people know me for. They don't know if I have the knowledge, but they know that I will know someone that will firsthand know have
You're the
that
go-to
knowledge.
person. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Irina, one more question about this,
Mhm.
and it's super practical, but do you do this very opportunistic in a way that, oh, now I've learned something, here's an insight, I'm going to seek out where I can sort of
Blast that
spread it?
information. Yeah.
Or do you like have in your weekly calendar a block of 2 hours that says knowledge spreading, giving favors? Like, how do you approach this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, there is kind of a strategic time planned for it, because I've got moments when people are reading the news in the morning, or like scrolling through LinkedIn. Like, everyone has that that moment at the start of their day or of their week when they're just doing random things. That's my moment for connecting the dots. And that's my moment for kind of like thinking, who do I want to actively engage with this week? And it's usually connected, like it's strategic in the moment of the week, but it's not so strategic on who exactly will it be, because it's mostly connected to what kind of energy do I want back as well.
Yeah.
Because I kind of know the people that I want to engage with, or at least I know what their energy feels like, and I'm adding that energy into my calendar in an active way and in a conscious way.
I think that's super important, that you have time allocated for this. And it's, for me, it's similar to when you want to write a book. You just need to block time in your calendar to write in, and you will not know what you will write in that specific hour.
No.
But having that time allocated knows what you need to focus on. So, okay,
Yeah.
yes, that makes sense. Gina, I'm curious. So you shared about some role models like the grandma therapist and team coach. How are you using that to make your own life easier?
Good question. I think I have worked through that inspiration and broken it down into different tactics. And so I'm aware of what tactics I'm taking when I'm trying to
Give us a
engage a
tactic.
team.
We want to know about tactics. What's
You
your
wanna
favorite one?
So frequently, I think teams in big multi-time zone organizations, lots of matrix structures, lots of different priorities. I think we all understand that. They've got a lot going on, and there's a lot of meetings, and there's not enough time to do the work. And so one of the tactics is to literally create a office hour. And so this is creating space for casual collaboration. So the same way sometimes you go into the office and you want to have a casual collision where you'll be able to chat and meet somebody in a virtual setting. That doesn't always happen as easily because it feels formal to sign up and make a calendar invite just to say hi or ask a silly question. In office hours, what I'm doing is I am holding the space on my calendar. It's optional for everyone else on a certain set of teams or a single team. And they can show up. And they don't have to show up. But when they do, it's a place that they know that if they just are passing by with a, hey, is that the right thing that I'm supposed to be working on? It's way lower. It's way easier to engage and less pressure. And you can also ask a fun question too, or just say how you're doing. This works for individuals, and it also works for teams that like they show up and sometimes they just want to listen to what's going on in other people's world. And so we're getting those moments of collaboration and connection, like Irina was just speaking to, like, oh, those people are right there. They're in that moment and they're able to hear what else is going on and maybe have a cool connection.
So the office hour sounds great. How do you promote it? How do people actually know that they can walk into your virtual office?
I have different types of office hours. I have an open office hour for just service design questions. That's more of a Calendly and standard. But I think with all of these types of things, this is not a thing to just copy paste. The same with a template or a framework. You don't copy paste. You have to engage with some type of purpose and iterate on take the framework and make it work for your context. I don't have it for everybody. I have a specific project of with the innovation lab where they're working through experiments, and there's different times throughout the year that they need that type of engagement. And so it's not consistent. It's like, hey, for this 6 weeks of Q1, we have open office hours, and you know why you could show up, and here's some ideas that you might want to talk about, and here if you want it. And then another 6 weeks later in the year is going to have a different purpose. And so with any of these tactics, tying it to a purpose and context is super important.
And again, getting super practical, do you just share an email with your team members, or do you share it on Slack? Like, what do you do?
Very practically, it is a Outlook calendar invite that holds my time, but is optional or like free on everyone else who's receiving it. So it doesn't block their schedule, but it'll block my schedule. So no one will schedule me. But they have the option to show up.
That's really smart. Okay, cool. So two sessions on collaboration and influence, different angles, super important. And I think people get, like, even if we don't get practical tactics like you just shared, it helps us to rethink things and ask questions that we maybe aren't asking because we're just so busy in the day to day. And I like these moments at the dinner table because they allow us to pause at least for 2 hours every month and sort of step back and what am I doing here? Is there a smarter way? Is there a better way? How are you doing it? Like, what are your thoughts on this? So, yeah, the dinner table is pretty cool for that. And the next topic, Irina, is again related to in-house service design. Now, I speak to a lot of people. I speak to a lot of people in general, and somehow it seems that the grass is always greener. When you're consulting, you sort of long for everything that you could potentially get in-house. If you're in-house, you sort of long for the dynamic of being at a consultancy. Now, you've had experience in both. I'm curious from your perspective, if you look at in-house service design, what's maybe a misconception that you feel a lot of people have who aren't yet in-house about being in-house? That's in-house a lot of time in the same sentence.
I mean, a lot of the misconceptions come from the expectation that you would be able to actually get the outcome in production. That's the first. Let's start with that. Let's start with the fact that being in-house can guarantee to some degree that you will obtain more stakeholder engagement and more leadership support. And it can potentially guarantee that the knowledge that you've acquired on that project will be somehow reused through you going into other projects later on. The reality is that you are not standing for too long with any internal team, because as a service designer, the phase of, and again, maybe Gina, you're in a different type of organization because you're in the innovation part, right? Where by nature you have new projects every few months or every few years. But when you're with a product team like I've been, even if it's in the innovation department, you're standing with that product team for as long as they are in the discovery phase and they are in the not rolled out service yet. Once the service is rolled out, there's a little bit less of that engagement from service design perspective, and it's more the service design that does optimization of operations, which is a very different type of work. So the misconception is that you are going to be with a product team for longer, like 3 years or something like that, and that you're going to acquire in-depth knowledge in a certain domain. And that's not true. What you're doing is you're coming in exactly like a consulting that's doing product discovery, and you're with a product team that will be there for the product launch. And then after the product is launched, is very likely that the business will shift a little bit priorities and you will be reallocated somewhere else where you're starting something new. So there's that. And then lastly, I guess there is the misconception that you're going to be bored because you're in the same organization and there's nothing new. Regardless of the size of the organization, now we really need to look at how service design operates. Service design operates at the level of big picture strategic, but every single domain has knowledge that lets you recontextualize that strategy from a different angle. So you're always actually learning new things in different parts of the organization. So you're not really getting bored. You're just you're like, I'm in a company that mainly does retail, but being in accessibility, I actually learn accessibility for retail. But if I look at the types of support that I offer support for products that are human resource based, right? So then they are literally about the products in recruitment or in other services, regarding coworkers, not regarding customers. So I'm constantly learning new things. So that's one of the misconceptions.
At least two. So
At least two, yeah.
you're
That's
not
the second
like,
one.
yeah, you're often not seeing it all the way through to the implementation, and you're not getting bored. Those are like, one is reassuring, the other one is maybe like a good,
Yeah.
a good reminder. Okay. Yeah.
We know we do a good job when we make ourselves redundant. So
Mm.
I don't feel that I'm being moved because I'm not seeing the implementation. I feel that I've done my job there and that the big picture is
Yep.
enabled. And now there's an operations specialist that can be called, it's called service delivery or something like that. And that's a service delivery manager that does not have the competence of a service designer that does the up and running of the service long term.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Yeah, we can add more value, or the highest return on investment is at the fuzzy front end, as we know. That is where we excel. So, Irina, you mentioned you've done a good job when you've made yourself redundant. Gina, at the start of our conversation, you said something related to, I know I've done a good job when the pace is shifting and people are taking more time to think. How do you gauge that? How do you actually know? Like, it's Friday afternoon, you're sort of looking back on your week and you're sitting down and thinking, was this a good week? How do you gauge that?
I think it's actually similar to what Irina is saying. It's that I kind of become redundant. There was a beginning where they needed a little bit of a sounding board or time and space that couldn't be created on their own. And now, what I'm witnessing from the team or the single team member is that they're actually coming to me being like, hey, does this make sense? And I'm like, versus a blank piece of paper and a jumbled head of this priority and this priority and this thing and this person. And so I think that shift is what I see as success.
Okay, Gina. So let me challenge you on this one.
Okay.
It's Friday afternoon again, and you could either feel that you've made yourself redundant by helping people to solve a problem, or by just not being able to deliver value, and they'll question like, what is Gina doing in this space?
Well, I don't think that attitude is going to get us anywhere. And because I hear it from every service center I talk to, we hear it in every dinner table. What's my value? What's like, I think that attitude doesn't get us to be in a good place because we can't quantify our value in the same way as someone who completes a spreadsheet or has a very tactical output all the time. And so push away. I think some of the ideas that came from working through the concepts of what is it, how can I embody a therapist? How can I embody a coach or a grandma in these situations was codifying spaces to say, these are the things I'm doing to hold space. And so things I've done at, Friday, end of week is like, okay, I created space for these 3 discussions to happen or this one discussion to happen. I coached someone through this, and therefore I saw this impact change in their conversation. It does put pressure on me to make sure I'm taking notice of what happens in those moments because I'm not doing the work. I need to observe the change. But that change is what I'm able to facilitate.
Are you helping yourself to notice these things by actually writing them down, by journaling them, or do you have a practice around that?
Yeah. We need to update Jira tickets and update. I have my own personal notebook. I keep with what I was able to accomplish. I think what was helpful for me was almost running a little design process on myself and saying, what are all these things I'm doing in a week? And being super non-judgmental about what was happening. It was a chat here, a coffee here, this kind of conversation, writing down every little thing I did, and then doing a clustering exercise. And then that became those moments of, okay, well, I do spend a fair bit of time, like maybe coaching a couple hours a week and working through a problem with somebody that's maybe a little bit more favor-like. I do spend X number of hours working on workshops per week, and that workshop is able to facilitate this type of discussion. Or I I planned this meeting in a very specific way so that they could have a conversation about both the thing they need and the thing they really need to talk about. And so planting those sneaky opportunities and different opportunities throughout the week.
I can imagine that tracking your time like that also helps you to better see maybe all the work that you see as a byproduct or a necessity usually now becomes the main element of how you deliver value. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's a great summary of it.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that every week. I don't obsessively track my time every week like that. I'll do a little calibration every 4 to 6 months, make sure like, okay, are we still doing these activities?
This would be such an interesting community exercise for everybody involved in the community to track their time for a week and then compare notes.
All right, let's do another dinner table on it.
Oh man, this is going to be a community challenge. I'm going to propose this, or maybe even for the wider community. Wouldn't it be awesome if we had the timesheets of, I don't know, 100, 200 service design professionals on a 15 by 15 minute basis? That would be insane.
I think the important part there is not judging yourself or what you're doing and letting the work speak to what it is. And it might be a lot of emails, or it might be a lot of listening, or it might be a lot of these things that are not sexy, but that's the work. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that's part of the job, whatever job you're doing, service design or not.
That would be so cool. Yeah. Okay. So one important lesson here is do not judge the work that you're doing initially. Just observe. Irina, related to that, if you had to go back and give some advice to a younger Irina, Gina mentioned, do not judge your work. Like, what advice would you give yourself?
I absolutely love what Gina said about like the acknowledging what kind of conversations you've shifted and for whom, and being able to put that in notes. So there's a great power to that from multiple angles, and that's the part of thing that I would do more of, because old Irina would not necessarily acknowledge how she is quantifying the understanding that the others had shifted through her work, and would only quantify her results on, did I actually make them change? And would not necessarily look into the vocabulary that changed, and maybe in 2 years, whatever needed to happen happened. And I actually gain a lot of confidence by looking 2 years after I've started a discussion somewhere. What happened to those people? Where are they at now? How did they use that? How did they change whatever was going wrong or not optimal, to make it better? And I've noticed really powerful shifts, and that's what gave me confidence. And that's the work that I present. Like if I go to an interview right now for a job, then that's what I talk about. I talk about how I changed the outcome and how I analyzed the outcome 2 years later, because I don't know in the moment what exactly the shift would do. So I would look at younger Irina and I would trust more that her words will create that ripple effect of change. And I will trust more that even though the thinking that she has and how she's coding at that moment, whatever she's done, is powerful enough to actually create a big shift in 2 years. Or earlier, depending on how ready the material, right? The client needs to be ready too. You can only do as much with a client, right? Whether that client is internal or external. So I would look more into that.
Like having that confidence, it's paradoxical, isn't it? Like you gain that confidence by going through this experience and sort of seeing as time progresses that your work has had some kind of impact.
But it's scary. It's like
what makes it scary?
I'm gonna give one example that I had in my past, right? Like I worked with an organization for exactly 4 months, and it wasn't even full time because at that time I was still doing a master's degree. So I was working with them 3 days a week for 4 months for something that they said they would hire someone for at least 6 months full time. And in that time, I mapped out the organizational outcome and like they were doing reporting in real estate. And they wanted to know, how did they do 10 years of that activity? What is the outcome and what have they improved? And I looked into the numbers and I looked into everything, but I was like, let's look in what you measured throughout 10 years. How did that change? And I looked into their mechanisms of internal things. And I knew that the outcome of that report that I created is not going to be sexy for marketing, because marketing was really looking for pretty numbers. And I was showing powerful transformations in thinking of how that report changed, how they perceive climate change to begin with, and all of that. And I was really sure that if they accept everything that I've done in that report, the organization will not look the same in 2 years. So I knew that I'm happy that I'm only there for 4 months, because this is going to be shaky grounds. It's going to be a big earthquake, and I don't want to be there for it. So I was really scared of it. And 2 years later, the CEO left, the board of directors changed, the product matured, everything changed exactly how I predicted in that report. And that was because I started ripple effects of threads of thinking in people that were not necessarily at the top, were in the trenches. I was asking them questions that enabled them to have the courage and the vocabulary to ask different things to their bosses and to go forward in different ways.
So, Irina...
so that's why it's scary.
Yeah. Well, my follow-up question is, how do you get over that? Where do you find the courage and confidence? Like, we are in the business of delivering change. You mentioned earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite intense. And we meet resistance, we meet pushback day in, day out. We're always seeking better. So where do you find the courage to keep on doing this?
It's in the mandate. So if you're mandated as a consultant, then you know that what they ask you to do is to create that shift and to cause that chasm, because they don't want to do it internally. They want to blame someone externally for it, and you're going to be the one with the blame, and that's okay. And when you're internal, the mandate that you are given is to cause that, but to cause it in stages that the organization can last, that the leadership that is mandating you will still be there in 2 years and will have a new purpose that you are designing for, and you're holding their hand for it. So the mandate that you're given is the one that's giving you the courage.
Although it's not often very explicit, and you sort of
it's
have to
not,
learn,
but
you have to learn it on the job. Yeah.
Contractually, you're looking at who's feeding you. Like, at the end of the day, who's feeding you? Are you going to bite the hand that's feeding you? No. Then how are you able to still create change in such a way that everyone that is ethically supposed to win is going to win?
Yeah, that's a good question. Gina, I also want to put this one on you. I'm not sure how often you meet resistance and pushback, but I'm curious, what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated to still move forward?
I let myself get frustrated and acknowledge it. And I think that helps make it be less of a thing. And then I try and get curious. And that could be like understanding why, like what the heck is happening inside of this organization, and try and turn it into a constraint that I have to now design around or design with, or change my approach to. That's hard. I said something that seems so simple, but like that's really hard to do. And sometimes that curiosity comes from reading another book, a design book that somebody's written, something about ethnography, or just getting curious about another way to think and getting a little intellectual, because I think then it takes me out of the moment and puts it into a bigger picture. And I think that anything that brings it into the bigger picture is going to help with that frustration.
Acceptance seems to be a theme in this conversation. Curiosity. Yeah. And in the end, everything is a design challenge. So when you can embrace that, then things get a lot more simple. Final question I have for both of you. I'll start with you, Gina. A lot of service design professionals are listening to our conversation. Some of them are in-house. What's a question that you'd ask somebody who's in-house? What would you like to know from them?
So many things. I want to follow everyone around and know what they're doing. I think observation is really powerful. And so I'm not sure I have a question until I see the context that something's happening in.
We need to do those timesheets.
I think we need to do the timesheets. Yeah.
Show us. Can you show me your timesheet? That might be your that might be your question.
Just show me the data. I think to everyone, all service designers and doing in-house work, I think I'd want to know what keeps them motivated as well, because it's different in different organizations. And
those are two pretty good questions already, you know.
I think so, yeah.
Marinate on it. If you have more, I would love to know.
Okay.
Irina, as well, the question for you, what would you like to know?
I have very specific questions, actually. Like, my first question is usually who's your manager? Like, who's going to be the manager of this new role that you're hiring for, or that you are doing? And who's giving you mandate? Because that usually shows the maturity of the organization. And it shows a little bit about how the organization is set up in such a way that you are either doing very nitty-gritty work or you're doing strategic work. So the positioning in the organization is the first thing. And then the second is like, okay, you've got mandate clear, but now what is the level of content that you are redesigning and challenging in the organization throughout time? So I've had an employer that was not necessarily looking to improve the service that they were offering. They were literally just trying to preserve more of the same and just make it more optimal. And that's fine, but you need a different type of designer there. You don't need a service designer, because I'm going to question things. And that's the part where you need to know for how long you're going to have a job in that organization, kind of like for how long in that department, at least, right? And how quickly are you going to shift from one project to another? Because the more you are allowed to dive into the content, the more deep the transformation you will create. So these are the questions that I would ask.
Who's your manager? That's a good
who's
question.
your manager, and how and how deep is the content that you are able to dive in? Because, like I said, a service designer that stays for 3 years in the same product team is definitely not made redundant on time.
Gina, you wanted to add something to this? I saw you.
I love those questions. I'd like to adopt them as my own, but I'll add in, I'd want to know when service designers across the org have like surfaced their own problems and like their own projects, how they're doing that and approaching it. And then also, when do they know when to quit? When is it that the service designer is not appropriate anymore? And how do you exit? On a project, not from your whole org.
When do you know you're redundant? Yeah. So for anyone who's listening, I would love to explore these questions. The Circle community is a pretty good place and space to actually have these conversations. If this has inspired you, check out the show notes. We'll have some links there. You'll meet people like Irina and Gina in that community. And I don't know, about 70 other service design professionals from all over the globe who are also geeking out on topics like this. For now, thanks, Irina. Thanks, Gina, for coming on, sharing your journeys with us, sharing your lessons, learnings, and hopefully also a little bit of optimism for all of us listening and doing this work.
Sure.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Irina and Gina, and that you're taking away some valuable and perhaps unconventional insights that you can apply to your own work. If there are stories about navigating change, building influence in creative ways, or the unique paths into the field resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment on this episode. You can do so on Spotify and YouTube. And if this conversation has sparked or maybe even amplified your desire to connect with other in-house service design professionals for those kinds of deep, honest discussions that challenge your thinking and support your journey, then I'd love to welcome you in the circle. In the circle, you'll connect with a passionate group of smart and generous professionals like you. We meet multiple times each month to share our wins, our failures, and practical strategies like the ones Irina and Gina shared today. It's all about pushing each other forward, offering encouragement, and peer support when we need it the most. To learn more about the circle and how you can join us, please head over to servicedesignshow.com/circle. And of course, you'll find that link in the show notes. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Service Design Show. My name is Mark Fontijn. Take care and see you soon.